Well, I think her husband obviously is this global legend, known all across the world, a huge character. And I think we've got a little bit of a syndrome going on here where great oak trees kind of overshadow everything growing sort of beside them or beneath them. And so she disappeared into historical obscurity. I mean, really pretty much from the end of the war. People who were around at the time realised how important she was. Churchill's chief of staff, his doctor, the American ambassador, all the rest of it. But she didn't push herself forward at all. She never sort of claimed glory or credit. And also, you know, Churchill wrote the book that really started the whole industry of Second World War history, and his own book barely mentions her. Volume 2, for instance, of his sixth volume, World War II, mentions her once in the index of Churchill Misses. So if no one else was going to write about her, and she wasn't pushing herself forward, she was allowed just to sort of retreat into this kind of historical myth, which is where I found her. And I started reading some of the letters that she sent to him. Most people have concentrated on his letters to her. Her letters are extraordinary. They're political, they're affectionate, but they're unbelievably forthright with him sometimes. Really quite astonishingly so. And there was one that she sent to him just after he became Prime Minister in 1940 that just made me sit up and think, wow, I had no idea. She was such a formidable character. Well, Churchill was a genius in many ways that we know of him now, but he wasn't always a very rational person. He was given to sort of great outbursts of emotion, mood swings. He could make some very, very foolish judgments. He also wasn't very empathetic. He didn't understand other people, which meant that he gave offence a lot of the time. She realised this quite early in her marriage, and she realised actually that she was able to help him on this, so she could warn him if he was offending people. She could come up with ways of him trying to bring people on side. She could be the more rational one. She could take a more rational approach to situations, problems, opportunities. And so really right from the beginning of their marriage, she read up hugely all the newspapers, piles and piles of biographies and historical books. She wanted to be really well read so that she could take him on, she could advise him. And she really did that right from the beginning, even sometimes giving speeches on his behalf and always helping him to write his speeches, even the most famous ones. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was everything. I mean, I think this is probably the greatest political partnership in our country, possibly any country. She advised them on every aspect of politics. So it was a love match. I'm not trying to say this wasn't a marriage. It was quite a stormy one, but it was also this political partnership. She advised him on appointments. She advised him on strategy. She advised him on military affairs. She advised him on conferences with Roosevelt, with de Gaulle, with Stalin. She advised him on every single aspect of his political career. Well, Clementine was the granddaughter of a Scottish earl, the sort of family seat of romantic castle. But her own mother, Lady Blanche, was married off quite quickly in haste in her 20s. She was a little bit of a Victorian wild child. The man that she married, Colonel Henry Hosier, this was not a love match. It was a very cold marriage. He didn't want children. She did. She went freelance. She entertained a lot of lovers, one of whom was the grandfather of the Mitford sisters, the First Lord Ruysdael, almost certainly Clementine's father. It's pretty certain that Colonel Hosier wasn't her father. Anyway, as a result of all of this, they got divorced, and Lady Blanche was very, very hard up. There was no family cash. And Clementine was brought up a childhood constantly moving from one set of furnished rooms to another, constantly worrying about money, constantly worrying about creditors, the humiliation of having to ask for credit in food shops, also the shame of her mother having all these boyfriends, sometimes having rows in the street, this kind of thing. She craved stability, she craved respectability, but she also craved an exciting life, something that she could apply her brain to. Puffing up cushions and folding newspapers, which is what her mother wanted to do, was dreary. It was anathema to her. She wanted a way into a life that could show her the world. Well, she was a woman, a Victorian woman, really. She couldn't do that off her own back, but she could marry someone who could do it, and she could help him, and she could prove that despite this rackety background, despite the fact that people were laughing that she'd made her own clothes, and they did, and she knew they were doing that, She wanted to prove that she was good enough to be the wife of a man she considered great from the day that she first met him, really. And that was what drove her from then on. She reinvented herself. Quite a lot of people who read my book come up with the idea or the conclusion that Churchill would not have been the great leader he was without her. I very much believe that. I think she stopped, as she put it herself, Churchill running amok. He could be a bully, he could be a tyrant. She brought the best out of him and she minimised the worst. And I think it is quite likely he wouldn't have become Prime Minister without her in 1940. I think it's pretty certain that he would not have been the great war leader he was without her in the Second World War. And in that sense, she had a huge impact. His own Chief of Staff, General Ismay, said that without Clementine, the history of Winston Churchill and the history of the world would have been very different. And that's the conclusion I came to too. I think in some ways she was a very modern woman contained by her era. She used to talk about how frustrating it was for being born with petticoats, as she put it, to the trousers. She said otherwise she would have been a statesman. I reckon if she was around now, she'd be the leader of a political party, or she would certainly be manoeuvring to be so. She might have had a crack at being Prime Minister, who knows. But she would have had her own career. She was a terrifically talented politician who put all her talents and skills and energy into her husband's career, but actually really, really had them herself.